thing is open right now. I just have a question, a couple questions maybe, but the main one is, can you tell me sort of where in here it really allows for RV parks? Or, in fact, at the meeting the other day when there was such a discussion over someone just adding an RV as a guest house, I mean, it was a huge length of time over that one issue. And now that I am, quote, an RVer, there are no places on this end of our Pickens, Gilmer, Fannin that's conducive for RVs. And there are beautiful parks in like Hiawassee, and most parks that I've spent time in all across the country and in Florida and South Georgia, I mean, they're beautiful and they generate a lot of revenue, and it brings people to this area. Instead, they all have to drive through and go all the way to Hiawassee or the upper end of Blairsville. And why are we so anti-RVs?
David, which one would allow for an RV park? I'd have to look it up, but I think you got to.
Not sure exactly which one. It's probably going to be the R3, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and it's been a while since I've looked at it, there is actually an ordinance on with respect to RV campers, campgrounds. Yeah.
Well, it says, I mean, in there, the way I read it was it can only be allowed if there's city water, which is very limited if you're going to buy the land. I mean, you can't then afford to put an RV park on the land that's big enough that's covered by city water, put an RV park. And whenever I stay in an RV park, which is quite often, because I'm interested in doing an RV park, to be perfectly honest, I ask them about sewage and things like that. And almost every one of them is on septic. A couple of them have had kind of like a private sewage treatment system, small one within the park. But for the most part, there are septic disposal areas periodically throughout the park. And I guess sometimes it depends on if the park has been there a long time or if it was newly developed. And I just was curious why it has to be on land served by city water.
One of the things that we all pretty much agree on here is that we would like for whatever changes are made to the land use ordinance this go around to encompass pretty much everything that we can think of, so that we're not having to come back and do another one anytime soon. So with that in mind, what I would say is I would ask Edwina to put on the agenda for the upcoming, we'll have an upcoming special call meeting to discuss the changes. So I would ask Edwina if you would go ahead and put them on RV parks as a topic of discussion on that, and we can discuss it.
And it actually, I'm just looking at it now, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Karen, but they can have their own water supply as long as it's been approved by an authority having jurisdiction. So it doesn't necessarily need to be attached to county or municipal water. It just simply has to be.
But it will be a public supply.
Yeah, it has to be approved by the authority having jurisdiction. So again, I mean, it could be a private water system.
It doesn't have to be the public sewage system?
No, it says where the RV park, and there is a set of ordinances that are in place with respect to RV parks, but it says where the RV park or campground has its own water supply system, and that would entail the private system, the components of the system shall be approved by the authority having jurisdiction. And in that scenario, it'd be DNR, if I'm not mistaken. And It's got some pressure requirements, and just talk. It's pretty comprehensive, and it may not have been anything that you've seen literature-wise, because I think you've been looking at the land use ordinance and not necessarily the RV ordinance. Yeah.
What, can you tell me the
Yes.
ordinance number?
Yeah, if, it's going to be under, it's going to start at 78-81. It's going to be titled Recreational Vehicle Parks and Campgrounds. 7881.
And to add into that, I think we could use another RV park. They are beautiful ones out there, so go for it. You can do it.
Does Coosaways campground fall under that?
I believe it. No, they'd be grandfathered.
It's actually a subdivision. It's privately owned lots in there, and it was developed long before there was any.
Late 70s, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We have Plum Nelly is one, and there's another one.
Diamond Lure.
Yes, and I think they're both full, like all the time, a waiting list for.
I think most of them have permanent, have spaces.
A lot of them.
And that is
They-
true. Most of them do have permanent residences, and that's something that the ordinance does not provide for, if I remember correctly, is that the campgrounds that would be established now would be transient campgrounds.
I think Plum Nelly makes some of them, like only percentages permanent, and the others are temporary.
And we require a minimum of 5 acres, and it has to have conditional use approval in an A1 zone and a site plan by the registered surveyor.
It can be done, it's just that there are some things, it's a little bit more difficult to develop that kind of campground. It's just that, than it is a single-family residence house site or subdivision.
Okay, any other comments? Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jim Smith. I mentioned yesterday in the work session that one of the things that I see happening that if we don't address it in this these amendments to the land use ordinance, I'm afraid it's going to get away from us, and that is where you have developments that impact county road infrastructure. And it can happen. I just learned, and I'm not going to call any names or anything, I just learned of one that is coming up in March that is on a single lane gravel road. It is supposedly a farm winery, tasting room, and open venue with traffic that not to exceed 50 vehicles or thereabouts. That's kind of the cutoff. And I can tell you that this single lane gravel road wouldn't handle 20 vehicles, much less 50. And these are the kinds of things that I see happening throughout the county, that if we don't somehow get some kind of control on it, it's going to wind up costing us being the taxpayers of Gilmer County, for an individual or company's private development. And I'll give you an example, as it's interesting that Jolene would mention RV Park. I guess it's 3 years ago, on Legion Road, the right-hand side of Legion Road is inside the city of LJ. LJ has different requirements than we do. But Legion Road was a county road. Well, but their requirements were that if a development is going to impact a public infrastructure, then they wanted to know what it was, and what it was going to cost, and things of that nature in order to make that a requirement of the development. Well, consequently, that development, when I looked at it, and they had all kinds of problems. They had road width problems, they had site visit problems, all kinds of traffic flow problems. The request was denied. And that's just an example of the kinds of things that I see happening that we may not be the ones to experience it, but if we don't get control of it today, it may be too late coming down the road. And I don't, I'm open to how we do it, but I think you've got to look at, and there are many municipalities and counties that make this a requirement. If you've got a development that is being proposed on a county public road, and it may require turning lanes, decel lanes, it may require widening, restripe. Those kinds of things should not be borne by the taxpayer, but by the developer. And that's what I'm saying. David, you're laughing.
No, I was yawning, actually.
Oh, you were yawning. So I put him to sleep.
Jim, one of the steps in the planning commission's review of these zoning applications does ask the question, is there any impact on, is there any burdensome, or I forget the exact words, I've just looked. But if we're not taking that into account, then I think we are missing something we ought to pay attention to. If it says public facilities and utilities are capable of adequately serving the proposed use, I mean, if the roads won't handle it, that's a problem.
Yeah, a few months ago, you had a rezoning come before you for the Board of Education on the Clear Creek school campus. And one of the issues that was raised at the time, and rightly so, was, what kind of traffic patterns were there going to be? What kind of impact was there going to be on county roads, i.e. Yukon Road, Clear Creek Road, Teague Road, and Dallas, you asked the question very appropriately. Well, in that case, they are required to do things, and I think I told you yesterday that they had approached me about us assisting them in finding a consultant to do the traffic study that is necessary. And the thing that with some of these developments, especially larger subdivisions and larger commercial developments, I don't think it's out of the ordinary to require a traffic study. In my days as a planner with the state of Tennessee, we did many of them, and those are the kinds of things that you need, or your successors need, to make the evaluation when a rezoning or development is coming to you. And I don't just mean the Board of Commissioners, I mean the Planning Commission as well.
Okay, any other comments?
I know y'all have mentioned potentially holding a special workshop to discuss this. Do y'all have an idea as to the date? Because it'd be critical in advertising, making sure we have a copy of the final draft available.
Let's see what we got here to pick from. Karen? Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
What month are we talking?
I would think we need to do it before the March meeting.
If you would like to have this final adopted by April, you're going to need to do it probably the week of the 25th to the 21st of March. Now, if you don't mind it not being final adopted until May, then you can find another date. But
The urgency of time is just getting, I'm sure you get it right.
I think that's exactly right. I'm afraid so. We'll let you get by with it this time. DeVille.
So, David, what is the required time length of advertising before this meeting, this workshop meeting could be had? I mean, how much time are you talking about needs to be?
it really needs to be in the newspaper no later than March the 6th, since that meeting in March is going to be March the 14th. You could cut it back, and I just don't think it would be advantageous to have that first advertisement on the 13th. It just leaves a little time for anybody to really have any notice of it, especially because you'd be discussing it at the same time of the date of the publication. So being the 6th, you really need to have that final draft no later than probably the 28th of February.
You need to have a workshop before then. Is there a requirement of time on advertising the workshop?
Now, the workshop can be 24 hours. They can advertise the workshop in 24-hour notice.
But that's if we adopt the way it's written now, right? If we make changes.
I'm assuming that y'all intend to make changes to the proposed draft, so we would really technically need to, it's going to need to be in these next 2 weeks, and I got to get the recommendations from the Builders Association and incorporate those into the draft, and then get those back out to y'all, and then y'all would certainly discuss it at that work session sometime either the 25th, 26th, 27th. Yeah, I just
I would say, I'd rather do it in April and have time to do this the way it needs to be done. Now, we're going to want to have a workshop, and we're going to want to invite all the Builders Association. Well, we'll invite everybody, but I know that y'all will want to weigh in on this. And I just don't want to try to rush this thing through. We're talking about, basically next week, and that's rushing it.
Yeah,
that's
I
what
think
my
that's what
concern was. So maybe we can look at something in the latter part of March, that third week of the 18th through the 22nd, or the 25th through the 29th, and get it in a final form, and then get it running to be first reader in April and the final adoption in May.
That works better for me.
And what I can do is send out 3 or 4 potential dates to see what works best for y'all, and we can pick one from those.
And does this need to be at the daytime or evening?
It can be any time. They've traditionally been in the daytime, but if you would request it be in the evening, then.
I just thought if we're talking to builders, it might be more advantageous to have it in the evening for them to be able
Let me
to
speak
hear.
for the working class. It definitely, if that could be accommodated, that would definitely be better for the working class people, is after hours.
DeVille, when does the Builders Association meet?
On the first Monday of each month, the board meets on the Wednesday after that.
I was just thinking maybe it could have been held the same night of the meeting and been a joint meeting, but that would be March the 4th, and I think that'll still be a little too early to pull it together.
Well, if I could say one more thing, I don't know where I fit in here or what I'm allowed to say, but
Anything you want to say?
well, I agree with Charlie. Miami, the codes, the land use codes there, the zoning there is not what they started out with, I'm sure. Nor is Gilmer County. This is a work in progress and will always be evolving. We really have appreciated the fact that this commission board has been very easy to work with and appreciates our plight. But this will possibly be ongoing for the rest of our lives, so let's not think that we're finalizing anything. And second to that, let's not rush it.
Exactly. Okay, that sounds good to me.
I think third week.
The
of March or
18th
so.
through the 22nd would be the preferred week. That would time out really good. That way, y'all can meet somewhere in that time period and discuss the draft, and then I can make any revisions from it, maybe even have a subsequent meeting that following week, and then finalize it and go from there.
I'll send out 3 or 4 potentials and see. And we do have the spring training too in March. I don't remember exactly.
Right, that's on Friday the 22nd. Oh, we'll be going down that Thursday. Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'll take that into account and send out 3 or 4 possibles.
Okay.
And
That's April, right? You're talking.
I thought, I was thinking we had something in March.
We did, the training.
Yeah, training.
There's March 22nd.
What date?
22nd, but we'll go down the 22nd.
I didn't put that.
March 22nd or February?
We're not, we have a training that we're trying to plan the meeting around.
But the dates that I will propose to y'all will be planned around that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. Are there any other comments that anybody would like to make? If not, I would make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor? Aye. And we